like to thank the panel this evening, Kyle Okamura, Mike Bernardo, and Zane Marshall. This kind of all came together at the last minute, but I think we're all going to be in pretty good shape here. And I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and he will introduce everybody and be the MC for tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. All right, I'm just going to do the introductions now, and I'm going to do them in the speaking order. So it's not alphabetical, this is the speaking order. So don't get angry at me. I do know how to alphabetize, and I'm not doing it in that order. So I know there's some teachers out there. Be nice to me. Okay, first speaker tonight is Mike Bernardo, and I'm not going to write. Not going to go through all your letters. I'm going to do it the first time here because it's P-E-P-M-P-L-E-E-D-A-P. I have no idea. You'd have to go through all those. I mean, but he's he's deputy chief deputy. I don't know. That sounds your law enforcement or something. But probably wish you could be sometimes when you're dealing with folks. But no, deputy chief for the Boulder Canyon operations of the Bureau of Reclamation. Whew. Man, I'd like to see your business card. With second-level oversight of the river operations and modeling and research groups. In this capacity, he works with multidisciplinary teams to continue to challenge the status quo by and you get me first. How do you like that? Collaboratively pursuing the best available science and using it to continually advance the Bureau's methods and support its decisions. Mike graduated from the New Jersey Institute of Technology with BA degrees in both mechanical engineering and business. Holds a master's in public administration from UNLV. That's good. My wife teaches there. That's good. And is currently pursuing his doctorate in public policy. Now, where are you pursuing that? They didn't say that. UNLV. Well, okay, well, that's good. We'll go with that. Yeah, we like to keep you local. That's a good thing. He is a licensed professional engineer. Ah, the PE. I got it. Oh. See, I can figure these things out. He is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Nevada, a certified project management professional, the PMP. Look at that. We get these things figured out eventually. A leadership in energy and environmental design, LEED. Accredited professional in building design and construction, and a diversity change agent for the Department of the Interior. Began his career with the Bureau of Reclamation in 2011 as a mechanical engineer for the Lower Colorado region, performing engineering design, analysis, and inspections for the Hoover, Davis, and Parker dams, as well as other water resources infrastructure in the southwestern United States. Mike will be speaking first tonight, but I'm not done. But wait, there's more. Zane Marshall will be speaking next. Zane is the director of the Water Resources Department of the Southern Nevada Water Authority, where he has worked for the past 25 years. He is a Las Vegas native and leads 5 divisions that oversee the management of water, land, and environmental resources, the implementation of environmental restoration and compliance, climate change, and sustainability programs. Zane has a BA in Environmental Studies and a Master of Arts in Science in Biology and Statistics from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Another UNLV grad. Very good. He is also a 2014 graduate of the Keenan-Flagler, and I don't know whether I pronounced those correctly. Was I close? Close, okay. Keenan-Flagler? Yes. Takes me a couple of tries. I'll get there eventually. Keenan-Flagler Business School's Water and Wastewater Leadership Center, and a 2015 graduate of the Las Vegas Metro Chamber of Commerce's Leadership Las Vegas program. Zane has served on the board of directors for the Alliance for Water Efficiency, on the board of directors of the Great Basin Bird Observatory, as a National Park Service volunteer member of the Devil's Hole Dive Team. That's got to be fun. That would be very interesting. And as an enlisted member of the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve. In 2007, Zane received UNLV's Environmental Studies Outstanding Alumni Award for leadership, contributions, and dedication to improve the environment. And last but not least, even though it did actually work out, geez, Kyle Okamura. See, worked out correctly. He is the Utilities Deputy Director at the City of Henderson. He has over 20 years of diverse public and private sector experience working within the water and wastewater industry. Past and present areas of responsibility include project delivery, construction management, water resources and infrastructure planning, water and wastewater infrastructure master planning, water treatment, water facilities operation and maintenance, asset management, customer service, account billing and collections, meter reading and maintenance, cross-connection control, GIS, financial planning, engineering design, organizational business planning, and client relations. Now, what you weren't told before I started all of this is there will be a quiz at the end of the talks tonight. It will be multiple choice, but I hope you took notes. So, if the three of you would like to come up here, and we will be having PowerPoints. Let's make sure, I don't know, hopefully we can have you all up here to do your PowerPoints. I think if we're sitting, it won't be too high.
That's okay for you?
Oh yeah, no, this is fine. I will hand this off to you. I will step off to the side. By the way, we will be taking questions after the three talks. So hold on to your questions, keep them in mind, because we will have a time to take questions at the end, but we're going to have the three talks first. So I'm going to hand this off to Mike. I should remember Mike, that's my brother's name as well. Mike, here you go.
Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate it. And thanks for explaining those acronyms at the end of my name. So us federal employees love acronyms, so it's a rite of passage for us. So again, I just wanted to thank you all for being here today and spending your evening, Wednesday evening with us to talk about this very important, unprecedented situation we're facing here in the West and in Southern Nevada. It's a pleasure to be here on this esteemed panel with Zane and Kyle. Thank you for inviting me to be here with you all. So I'm going to provide an update on the Colorado River Basin hydrology and update. So just a broad overview of reclamation, the Colorado River Basin, and drought and our modeling projections that are used to determine operations of the Colorado River in both Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Excuse me. So first I'll start off with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. We're an agency as part of the Department of the Interior. Just start my clock so I don't get too long-winded on y'all. We were established in 1902 under the Reclamation Act, which essentially created the Bureau of Reclamation to settle the 17 western United States. We're the largest wholesaler of water in the U.S., providing drinking water to over 40 million people, provide water to irrigate 10 million acres of farmland, producing 60% of the nation's fruits and vegetables. We're the second largest producer of hydroelectric power, with 58 power plants producing 40 billion kilowatt hours annually. And we have over 600 dams and reservoirs throughout those 17 states in Reclamation's portfolio. And this includes our region, which has the most famous Hoover Dam, as well as Davis Dam and Parker Dams downstream. So this is going to be a quick overview of the Colorado River Basin and how it's comprised. There's an upper basin, a lower basin. 7.5 million acre feet are apportioned to each under the Colorado River Compact of 1922 for a total of 15 million acre feet for domestic U.S., as well as 1.5 million acre feet to Mexico under the 1944 treaty with Mexico. But before I go into the presentation at large, I want to first tell you why this river and this basin are like no other. A little bit of an underdog story here. So, the 1,450-mile-long Colorado River is the 5th longest river in the U.S. and quite possibly the hardest working river in the world. It flows through the hottest and driest parts of the country where water is vitally important and without it would be uninhabitable. Additionally, it's a losing river in that water from the stream bed flows into the ground to recharge aquifers and groundwater basins. Agriculture's the dominant use of Colorado River water, accounting for approximately 70% of its use throughout the upper and lower basins combined. And 40% of the Colorado River's waters exported outside of the hydrologic boundary. So let me just pull up this laser pointer real quick. So this is the hydrologic boundary. Any water that falls within this shaded area falls back to the river or its tributaries somewhere. 40% of the river's water is exported outside of those shaded regions for use in adjacent areas in major metropolitan cities, such as Albuquerque and Santa Fe, New Mexico, Denver and Colorado River Front Range cities, Salt Lake City, Utah, Los Angeles, San Diego, etc. And the important part to note about that is that when that water is transported out of that boundary, it doesn't make its way back. So finally, I'll leave you with, it's the largest river in the US that doesn't reach the ocean. Hasn't reached the ocean for some time now. So in the lower Colorado Basin and lower Colorado River region of the Bureau of Reclamation, we have a unique charge in that we uphold the Secretary's water master function for the last 688 miles of the Colorado River. So under the Boulder Canyon Project Act of 1928, it established that the Secretary of the Interior is going to be the water master of that last 688 miles from Lee's Ferry, Arizona, down to the border with Mexico. And that's similar to a role that state engineers would perform in our counterparts in the Upper Basin and throughout the other areas of the U.S. So as part of that water master function, it's passed down through delegated authority to our regional director, and then the Boulder Canyon Operations Office performs the day-to-day mission. So that includes developing annual operating plans for Colorado River reservoirs and publishing them annually, administering water entitlements to make sure every person that has a water entitlement in the Colorado River has a signature signed letter from our regional director, approving U.S. water orders, accounting for all water use in the lower basin, and scheduling water releases and setting power generation targets from Hoover, Davis, and Parker dams. And also in doing so, some of our management objectives on the river are providing flood control and river regulation. That's why we were created. That's why we were here first, to settle. Hoover Dam was put there for a steady release downstream to tame the mighty Colorado so that they can settle in the irrigation districts in Yuma and Imperial Valleys. Generating hydropower, implementing multi-species conservation program, which includes habitat restoration and recovery of endangered species, and support of recreational opportunities on our beautiful lakes and rivers. So I'll just go over some lower basin hydrology and operations here. So right now we're in the driest 23-year period on record, and I'll say modern records, which is 1906 through 2022. However, when we look back at the paleo record, back 1,200 years, this is also one of the driest 23-year periods ever recorded in the last 1,200 years, if not the driest 23-year period. Only four of five past years only had 75% or less inflows into Lake Powell, which is where 90% of our water in the lower basin comes from through releases from the upper basin snowmelt that's captured in Lake Powell and delivered downstream. And Lake Powell and Lake Mead are at historically low levels, with Lake Powell at just 25% of capacity, 170 feet below full pool, and Lake Mead at just 28% of capacity and 180 feet below full pool. So the water year snowpack and precipitation so far as of November 14th, so again, all of the water is essentially stored in the upper basin, Rocky Mountains as snowpack, and runs off into Lake Powell from April through July with that spring runoff season. So right now, the water year, it's important to note, starts from October 1 through September 30th. So we're only about 6 weeks into the water year, and fluctuations on a little amount can make a big percentage, right? So just so you know, we're at 102% of average precipitation, that's rain and snow, and the current snowpack in the upper basin is 144% of median, which sounds great, but it's only 2.5 inches. So, but still better than where we were last year, which was only at around 60% or so. So we are still projecting with the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center to see an inflow of 5.29 million acre feet from April through July of 2023, which is important to note that's just 83% of average. One important note of the runoff I will share though, and I will share it on my next slide, is with the prolonged drought, one of the biggest changes that we've seen is what we call a soil moisture deficit in the upper basin. So soil moisture deficits have attributed to lower runoff conditions, even given average or slightly below average snowpack. So for instance, last year we had a 90% peak snow water equivalent. So our snowpack in the upper basin hit 90% of its average. Yet we only saw 60% runoff from that 90% snowpack. The year before we hit 89% and saw 30% of runoff from that 89% of average. And that's because of these soil moisture deficits. So when the ground is very dry early in the season and that top layer freezes over to freeze in those dry soil conditions, as soon as the spring comes and the snow starts to melt off, it permeates into the ground and the ground sucks it up like a sponge. So that's certainly one of the issues that we've been seeing, which has been causing significantly decreased runoffs into Lake Powell. And again, 90% of the water that we get here comes in Lake Mead or directly through the releases and the coordinated operations with Lake Powell. So this is just going to show you the different periods of records with these, with the snowpack, the natural flow of the Colorado River as measured at Lee's Ferry, Arizona, which is the dividing point between the upper and lower basin. From 1906 to 2019, that's what I would call the modern record. It's 14.8 million acre feet. Again, in the very beginning I mentioned the Colorado River Compact apportioned 7.5 million acre feet to each the upper and lower basin, and the 1944 treaty with Mexico allocated 1.5 million acre feet to Mexico. So that's 16.5 million acre feet are allocated annually, yet the natural flow at Lee's Ferry is just 14.8 million acre feet. Then when you look and you decrease that period of record from 1988 to 2019, 1988 is after the wet period of the early 80s, where all the Lake Mead was flooding, if some of you were here during that time, or spilling, I should say. We saw an average of 13.3 million acre feet of that natural flow. And 1988 is about the time where we started really seeing global temperatures start to change as a result of climate change. Then from 2000 to 2019, which is that modern drought period, that number decreases further to just 12.7 million acre feet. See this deficit from 16.5 million acre feet growing larger and larger. And the last 10 years, from just 2013 to 2022, that average is just 12 million acre feet over the last 10 years. So this amount is shrinking smaller and smaller, and something you'll hear later on, I'm sure from Zane and Kyle, is the term aridification, so a drying Colorado River, which doesn't necessarily mean drought, which is a short-term phenomenon. But there's some good news this year. We did see, these are what we call intervening flow or side inflows. This is the tributary and surface water runoff between Glen Canyon Dam and Hoover Dam that makes its way into Lake Mead. We started off very dry. We were having these very below average surface or side inflows, excuse me. However, as many of you heard, we had a great monsoon season. You've experienced it. We had a lot of rain, and we saw 125% of average in July, 279% of average in August, 189% of average in September, 136% of average in October. Now, I just want to say for every 70,000 acre feet right now in Lake Mead of water is 1 vertical foot in Lake Mead. So in August specifically, we saw 117,000 acre feet of additional water from what we modeled for, which is about 1.5 feet of direct water impact into Lake Mead. And through the entire monsoon season, if you add up this additional water that we saw, it added about 2.5 to 3 feet of water in Lake Mead. Additionally, because the lower basin is a demand-driven system, we release water to meet downstream agricultural demands. If it's raining here, the farmers are less likely downstream to order water to water their crops. So it also has an impact of backing up or reducing demands down in the system and allowing that water to be stored in Lake Mead, which could potentially be taken by the end of the year by the water districts reconciling their water orders, but they only have a finite amount of time to take it. So we've seen a difference of about 7 or 8 feet in Lake Mead as a result of this very wet monsoon season, which is good news when we haven't seen an increase over the summer for the last 10 years. So this slide just shows Lake Powell and Lake Mead end of year water storage. And blue is Lake Mead, gray is Lake Powell, and together is their combined capacity. Lake Mead, largest reservoir in the nation. Lake Powell, second largest reservoir in the nation. Immense storage capacities. In 1999, they were nearly full, the two reservoirs combined. They're at 92% of capacity. Then the drought started in 2000 to 2004 came, driest 5 consecutive years on record. They went from nearly full to just 50% of average, or 50% of capacity, excuse me. Then, due to different coordinated drought response activities, the 2007 interim guidelines, Minute 319, then Minute 323 with Mexico to reduce and conserve water and incentivize conservation, we hung out at around 50% of capacity in both reservoirs for about the next 10 or 15 years. But then 2000, and I'll direct your attention right here, 2000 to 2020 to 2022, we're seeing another phenomenon where we went from about 50% of average to now just 23% of average by the end of the water year, which was September 30th of 22. So again, unprecedented low levels in the reservoirs. This is a Lake Mead 24-month study model that we do. The blue, green, and red indicate different scenarios, blue being a very wet, green being a middle of the road, red being very dry. All of these gray little spaghetti lines in between represent different hydrologic traces from 1991 through 2020. This tells us if the past indicates what we may see again in the future, then this could very well be an area of hydrology or a level of Lake Mead that we may see. So what this shows is this very wet scenario, which we call the maximum possible, is not actually the maximum, or maximum probable, excuse me, is not actually the maximum possible because there's some spaghetti lines that go over there. And this minimum probable trace, which is a very dry 24-month study trace, which we use to determine operations on the reservoir, these lines also show that the minimum probable is not the minimum possible. So although we're planning in terms of this maximum blue, minimum red, and most probable green, there's hydrologic traces that can be better, but also that can be worse. So we're always trying to plan for those worst scenarios to ensure that we're prepared. This just shows how operations are coordinated between Lake Powell and Lake Mead. These are Lake Powell's operating tiers. These are Lake Mead's operating conditions. Lake Powell's operating currently, or going to be operating in 2023. Operating currently. Powell operates in a water year. If things aren't difficult enough, Powell operates from October 1st to September 30th. Mead operates from January 1st through December 31st. So they operate on different year spans. But Powell's currently, because we're in November, operating in water year 2023 in the lower elevation balancing tier. And Lake Mead is going to be operating, starting January 1st, in the first ever level 2 shortage condition. So there's still one further shortage condition below that, a level 3 shortage condition, which I'll show in this following slide. So last year we operated in the first ever level 1 shortage condition. Total conservation, at that time, reductions and conservation activities that are mandatory under the different law of the Colorado River activities was 613,000 acre feet. In 2021, that number increases 108,000 acre feet to 721,000 acre feet. That's equivalent to about another 7.5 feet vertical elevation in Lake Mead. And then under a level 3 shortage condition, which we may enter in by next year, 2024, that number actually increases to this 1.375 million acre feet, which is almost twice the conservation and reductions that mandatory that we've seen this year. And in addition, our partners in the states are also working on additional compensated conservation plans. The federal government is paying for compensated conservation plans to save every drop we can in this river to try to get through these through these times with a smaller Colorado River until we can come up with what operating criteria looks like post 2026. So with that, I'll just leave this one slide, which I always think is interesting because everybody wants to know, when will Lake Mead and when will Hoover Dam reach minimum power pool, or when will it reach dead pool? Well, we perform these activities called 5-year projections, where we put this number into probabilities. So operating Lake Mead less than 1,000 feet, there's about a 23% chance of that happening as soon as 2024. But looking at Lake Mead less than 950 feet, which is actually minimum power pool, we don't see that until 2026. There's a 7% chance of that happening. So if you look at those little spaghetti lines that I showed, 7% represents 2 of those traces. If you follow them out to 2026, they go below elevation 950. And then the good news, though, Lake Mead, looking at less than 900 feet, in which dead pool is 895 feet, and dead pool is the point in which we cannot pass water below Hoover Dam by any mechanical or natural means through the dam. SNWA can still pump from their 3rd low lake level pumping plant, which I'm sure Zane will say. But at that point, there's currently a negligible chance, we like to say non-zero probability of that happening, which is always good news. And to date, through different compensated conservation and other conservation measures, we've actually saved 5.5 million acre feet, or the equivalent of 90 vertical feet in Lake Mead. So that's since 2007, the establishment of the interim guidelines. So if we haven't been working together as partners, reclamation with the basin states and Mexico and the tribes, we could be in a lot worse situation right now. So we'll continue to work together as partners, and we'll continue to do everything we can to protect and secure this natural resource for you all, and work together as partners. So with that, I'll pass it over to Zane.
Great, thanks, Michael.
And I pulled yours up.
All right, sweet. There we go. Okay, can everybody hear me? Thank you and welcome, or welcome. Thank you for welcoming me to be here tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. So the Southern Nevada Water Authority is a regional water agency that was formed in 1991 by the state legislature and is composed of 7 member agencies that are the local cities here in the Las Vegas Valley, Boulder City, Las Vegas Valley Water District, Clark County Water Reclamation District, and Big Bend Water District. So it's all the water utilities and wastewater entities in Southern Nevada that work together to manage this limited resource here for the community. And as Mike indicated, we live in a harsh environment, and this graph just shows that Las Vegas is the driest metropolitan area in the Southwest, in the western United States. We get an average of 4 inches of rain per year, and compared to, for example, Phoenix, which gets more than twice that, 9.2 inches, Denver, 15.6 inches, Albuquerque, New Mexico, 9.5 inches. So because of that, we are mostly dependent on the Colorado River, and luckily we live and are located adjacent to the river. 90% of our supply for the community it comes from the Colorado River, and 10% from the local aquifer here in the Las Vegas Valley. And as a community, we've been using the Colorado River initially for the war effort in the 1940s. For the BMI built the first intake to support the basic management complex. And then 1971, Alfred Merritt Smith treatment plant and the first diversion for the municipal uses in the community was built in 71. Prior to that, this community depended on groundwater and artesian spring water from the Big Springs area. So we're obviously very focused on the Colorado River. Because we live within the hydrographic basin that's connected to the Colorado River, we have a unique opportunity to be able to return treated wastewater flows back to the Colorado River, and we get a return flow credit for that. That ability to return treated wastewater extends our water supply by about 75%. uses of water that don't allow the return, right, that are consumed by outdoor irrigation or evaporative cooling or other industries are consumptive uses. And they are the focus of our conservation programs to reduce consumptive use in the community. So as long as we use water indoors, we treat it and return it back to the Colorado River, and we can use a like amount again, right? So, and those consumptive uses include, again, outdoor uses, water that goes into septic systems, and we have about 15,000 septic systems here in the Las Vegas Valley. And again, cooling towers or evaporative cooling. As Mike indicated, the river has been in deficit with this long-term drought since about 2000, and this just shows the progress of Lake Mead's elevation since 1999. And in the early 2000s, really 2002 is what got us all excited, because there was about 25% of normal runoff that came into the basin. And so in 2003, we began a planning effort, and in 2004, the Water Authority produced its drought plan, which had more stringent conservation programs, which include changes to development codes. We implemented a rebate program, Water Smart Landscaping, for folks to replace their turf. We had development codes put in place, which restricted the placement of turf, so no turf in front yards and only 50% of turf in backyards, right? So that was our first effort to reduce demands and consumptive demands in the valley. Was really in the early 2000s when we got very serious about demand management. And it's a good thing, believe me. So in that effort, we focused on, to deal with the drought, we focused on developing necessary infrastructure to ensure our community was resilient and adaptive to those changing conditions on the river. We did extensive long-range water resource planning, so we develop a 50-year plan, and we revise that every year and take that to our board of directors. We have banked 9 years of consumptive use in water banks here in the Las Vegas Valley in groundwater. We've banked water in Lake Mead. We've banked groundwater in Arizona, and we've also banked water in California. So we have these supplies of banked water that we can turn to help us bridge to new resources in the future. And conservation has been a major focus, really to reduce consumptive uses in the valley. So one of those major infrastructure projects was the third intake and low lake level pumping station. And when we saw that 25% of normal inflow into the basin in 2002, we started a long-range planning effort, and in 2005, we started the environmental compliance and planning for this third intake. So it's a 3-mile underground tunnel. It's about 20 feet in diameter, and we completed that in 2015. And again, it gives us access to Lake Mead at an elevation below dead pool. And then we built the low lake level pumping station, which allows us to pump from that low elevation in the lake. And that was completed in 2019. And we lost our first intake in 2020. So talk about just-in-time infrastructure, right? We started that planning in 2005, and it took 15 years for us to complete it, and we completed it just on time. So, and today, the third intake is our primary intake, and we are currently using that low lake level pumping station to access our water supply in Lake Mead. Uh-oh, what did I do? I turned my presentation off, that's what I did. I can. It just. Okay, that's fine. It was on. There we go. Okay. So in terms of conservation, I mentioned we implemented in the early 2000s mandatory watering schedules, water efficient development codes, water waste fees, tiered water rate pricing, golf course watering budgets, rebate programs, and a significant investment in public outreach. So there's 4 pillars to our conservation program, and so that's education, pricing, incentives, and regulations. And so kind of a carrot and stick approach to incentivizing and encouraging our community to be more efficient in the way that they use water, and also helping to offset financial impacts of those actions through the rebate programs that we've implemented. And because of that conservation program, as a community, we've been very successful in reducing our consumptive demands, even in the face of unprecedented growth. So since 2002, our population in the community has grown by 49%, and our per capita water use has declined by 48%, and our Colorado River consumption has been reduced by 26%. So Mike said something about conservation and reduction in allocations on the Colorado River. Those reductions are based on trigger elevations in Lake Mead. And he said that we're currently at the second tier reduction, which means our allocation is 300,000 acre feet, and our current reduction under that second tier is 25,000 acre feet. So we, as a community, only have 275,000 acre feet available to us today because of conditions on the Colorado River. This graphic here shows our consumptive use of Colorado River waters through time since 2002, and you can see that in 2002 we were over our allocation by 25,000 acre feet. And because of our conservation initiatives, even though we've grown as a community, we've been able to reduce that consumptive use down to 242,000 acre feet in 2021, and we're looking at about 228,000 acre feet in 2022. And the red line is that 275,000 acre feet. So that's where our allocation sits today because of that reduction based on Colorado or Lake Mead elevations currently. So we have some freeboard as a community, but it's important for us to continue to be efficient with this limited water supply. We're also working on adding some additional resources. So we have a cooperative project with Metropolitan Water District to develop a recycling facility that would provide additional water to Metropolitan Water District service area. They would reduce their diversion off the Colorado River, and we would take a like amount at our diversion out of Lake Mead. So it's a way for us to add a resource and extend their local supply through a collaborative program, and we're providing funding for the development of that facility. So, as Michael said, we find ourselves today really in an unprecedented circumstance with the hydrology on the Colorado River, and we're experiencing aridification. So that there's more for us to do, and in the last resource plan that we completed last year, we have upped our effort to address or reduce consumption in the community, and those programs include landscape irrigation, a program to reduce the number of septic tanks in the community. The Water District just passed a moratorium on evaporative cooling for new development after 2026. We are addressing export products, so bottling plants that might want to come to Las Vegas, they'll have to demonstrate a significant economic value before we'll allow them to come into the community and export essentially our limited water supply. So there are things like that we're looking at to address large water users. And we're also looking at water feature evaporation. We've limited the ability for new development. So the Water District has restricted the size of new pools to 600 square feet, and no new water features, no community lakes, additional community lakes in the Las Vegas area. We've also put a moratorium on new golf courses as well, and we're putting golf courses under a more restrictive budget. So from 6.3 acre feet per irrigated acre to 4 acre feet per irrigated acre. So we are touching really every industry and every user sector within our community in a way to reduce those consumptive uses. And this here is just a step-down chart. So our goal is to get to 86 gallons per capita per day by 2035. And these are 14 strategies in our water resource plan that show kind of how we intend to get to that 86 GPCD. And this is really what it means. So these are some charts that we have, scenarios that we use in our water resource plan to show how our water resources and supplies stack up, how our demands are projected over time based on different gallons per capita per day achievements. And so the dark blue is our permanent resources, Colorado River and groundwater. The light blue is the cooperative project with Metropolitan Water District. The green are those temporary supplies, those banked water resources I mentioned earlier. And the brown are other future resources, other supplies that we might bring into the valley. And the goal for us is really to push out the need for those future resources as far as we can in time, and meet our community's needs with the permanent supplies that we have available to us as far into the future as we can. So in summary, Southern Nevada's water resources are secure thanks to considerable investment in infrastructure and conservation. Aridification is here, it's a thing, and we as a Colorado River community here in Las Vegas, but the entire basin needs to adapt to a changing climate and less water supply. Things like ornamental grass are a luxury, and we need to learn to live without ornamental grass. And Southern Nevada's economy can continue to grow and thrive only if we don't, we manage our water supply and use it in a responsible way. And we all must do our part, right? We're part of a community, as businesses, as customers, citizens here within our community. There's something we can all do, whether that is report water waste that you see in your neighborhood, or participate in a water smart landscaping program and remove turf that you're not currently using, or your family's not using, or things that you can do in your businesses to become more efficient. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Kyle. Thank you.
All righty. Good evening, everyone. Before I get started, I just wanted to thank Hafen and the Henderson Historical Society for having us out to talk about this incredibly important issue. And I think that last line in Zane's slide was a good tee-up and unplanned in terms of we all have to do our part. And so with that, and hopefully I don't get out of this, so with that, what I wanted to do tonight is to introduce you to what the City of Henderson is referring to as its Climate Response Initiative, or CRI. Some intentional behind that. We were going to call it our Drought Response Initiative, or DRI, which would also be appropriate, but we settled with Climate Response Initiative because really it, as Mike and Zane have explained, aridification and going forward, it really is, it's occurring because of climate change and not a drought where it's a cyclical thing. And so we have to plan accordingly that we are no longer going to get the kind of inflows that we saw in the past when the Colorado River Compact was first signed. And so we have to do something about it. All right, so the overarching goal of CRI is to significantly reduce the city's consumptive water use by establishing a clear reporting structure for a multi-departmental citywide initiative and establishing a prioritized work plan to implement significant changes in the short and the long term, anticipate issues and coordinate communication efforts, and improving external and internal communication to modify behavior across the city and throughout our community. So to ensure the success of CRI, we have established 3 distinct cross-functional teams comprised of representatives from across the city. So Lisa Corrado and Priscilla Howell are the sponsors of this initiative. Lisa is the Director of Community Development and Services for the city, and Priscilla is our Director of Utility Services and my fearless leader, as well as Lily's fearless leader. They are the ones that are ultimately responsible for achieving our water use reduction goals. As we proceed forward, they will be providing regular progress reports to our City Council. We've also established a Technical Advisory Group, or TAG, which is comprised of the city's executive team, including the City Manager's Office. The TAG will be the group that helps remove roadblocks and provides assistance in securing resources to ensure success of our climate response initiative. Last and certainly not least are our working groups. They are the ones that are responsible for turning our established strategies into actions. So the foundation of our climate response initiative is built upon 12 guiding principles. We will treat water as a finite resource and value it accordingly. We will prioritize GPCD reduction over aesthetic priorities. We will prioritize the climate response initiative for at least the next 6 to 12 months as we set the foundation for a permanent climate resilience program within the city. We will work to change behaviors by increasing community support through intensive education, outreach, and engagement activities. We will need to be more aggressive than other regional entities. We will begin to review development based upon water consumption criteria. We will achieve net zero consumptive water use to assist the region achieving the 86 gallon per capita day goal by 2035 that Zane mentioned. And by zero consumptive use, so our goal is the amount of consumptive water we used last year. Our target is by 2035, we will use no more consumptive water than we did in 2021. So that's our goal. We will prioritize enforcement efforts for large water use consumers. We will balance water conservation efforts and social equity, being mindful of disparate impacts to lower income areas that suffer most from heat vulnerability. We will redefine our community's aesthetic image with public art, structures, and designs that do not rely on plants and greenscaping. We will take a no-tolerance approach towards in compliance with our regulations, restrictions, and approved water use. We will commit to a sustainable future for the city that will still emphasize open space and outdoor recreation, but is congruent with our natural desert surroundings and available resources. So some of the strategies that we've developed and are moving forward, and there are three main categories, similar to what Zane had mentioned with the pillars. And so one of those is to target the outdoor water usage that is on irrigating turf. And so we've established a distinct water use reduction strategy that centers on the removal of turf. So we are going to increase the removal of turf as well as proceed with the conversion from cool to warm season turf at all of our parks, as well as encourage to do the same for our private parks. And so our Parks and Rec Department already has a plan to remove 2 million square feet of turf and to convert an additional 2 million square feet of turf from cool to warm season turf. And so what you'll end up seeing in those parks that do that is the grass will go dormant during the winters and then will come back when it gets warmer. So the grass isn't dead, but it's just dormant. And so it's part of our plan to do a lot of outreach and education to ensure that the public realizes that we're just trying to do our part to save water, and it's not that we're just allowing the grass to die. And so in doing that, we estimate that with the 2 million square feet of turf removal and the 2 million square feet of turf conversion, we will be able to save over 153 million gallons of water each year. We are also going to accelerate turf removal or non-functional turf removal that is part of Assembly Bill 356. And so even though there's a requirement to remove that turf by December 31st, 2026, we are going to try to develop a strategy around trying to accelerate that turf removal. And lastly, so what was not a part of the requirements for Assembly Bill 356 is front yard turf. And so even though it is not subject to that requirement to be removed by that deadline, we recognize that front yard turf, for the most part, is just aesthetic. And so what we're going to try to do is develop more incentive programs in addition to SNWA's Water Smart Landscape Rebate Program to try to incentivize that removal of the front yard turf. So to ensure we can continue to grow a sustainable community, we have or are in the process of putting in place additional regulations to achieve the maximum efficiency and use of our limited water resource. And Zane went through some of these during his presentation. So as Zane mentioned, we as well are moving forward with establishing a reduced golf course water budget from the 6.3 to 4 acre feet per irrigated acreage. And in doing that, just for the city of Henderson golf courses alone, we estimate that we'll end up saving over 400 million gallons of water each year by reducing that water budget by that 30%. Zane mentioned the pool size restrictions, and so no longer going forward are you going to be able to build a pool like that in the picture there. And so pool sizes are now going forward are now limited to 600 square feet in surface area. And lastly, and also as Zane has mentioned, we put in place regulations that apply to new development going forward. And so no longer are you going to be allowed to put grass anywhere in any new development other than in a school, a park, or a cemetery. And so what that means for all new homes going forward, you will not be allowed to put turf in your backyards. And lastly, knowing outdoor water use, again, is 100% consumptive. We have identified specific strategies for reducing outdoor water use. And Zane, again, mentioned some of these in his presentation. So we have increased water rates specifically to target those that use water excessively. And so the more water you use, you are going to pay exponentially higher amount for that water going forward. We are revising our landscape design standards. We are updating our park master plan, and we are developing a new park prototype that maximizes the efficient use of water on all future parks. And lastly, we are going to be increasing our watering enforcement and compliance. We have, similar to the Las Vegas Valley Water District, we have already doubled the costs for waterways fines, and we are going to continue to enforce the time of day and time of year watering schedules going forward. So that's my presentation, and I think that's...
Thank you. I want to thank our speakers. And we ready for some questions?
Absolutely.
Do we have, well, I see a question in the back. Yes, Darla. How does Lake Las Vegas fit into all of this? Who would like to take that?
Wow.
Kyle's
Where do I start? So Lake Las Vegas is it's a community in Henderson, and obviously it is an important community in Henderson, like all communities in Henderson. And so we are currently working with them on developing a water conservation plan specifically for Lake Las Vegas. We recognize that the lake itself provides some economic benefit, not only to the community but to the city. And so we are still working through the process right now with Lake Las Vegas to develop some type of a specific water conservation plan for that particular community.
Okay, yeah, Andy.
I don't know how to ask this, but one time I was told that globally, this earth has a finite amount of water, that we do not increase how much water is made, or we don't have water disappear. Is that true? Can somebody kind of, what we have is what we have, no more, no less?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. Where that water is and what form it's in, though, changes depending on climatic conditions around the planet, right? And so there's a very small volume of water that is fresh and available to us to utilize around the planet. And the one thing that climate change does about the water cycle, so that's one of the major impacts of climate change, is how water cycles around the planet. And with a warmer atmosphere, water cycles more erratically, right? So storms are less predictable, and there's more energy in the atmosphere. The atmosphere holds more water, and it's so where water falls is less predictable as climate change, as temperatures increase, and we get more extreme events like storms, more intense droughts with climate change. So you can imagine, with a pot of water, as you turn the heat up on the water starts to move around faster until it boils, right? Climate change is kind of the same way, where with more energy in the atmosphere, we get water moving around more and more erratically. So as water planners, it makes things a little more challenging, right, in terms of trying to predict the availability of water and how we operate our facilities, store water, release water. And so the things that I mentioned that we've all talked about tonight about facilities and new strategies for managing water supplies are measures to adapt to this changing environment that we find ourselves living in today.
Okay, yes, in the back.
I know recently they reduced the size of pools. Well, why are they even allowing new pools? I mean, we're in a crisis here, all of us. And why don't they restrict pools temporarily, and until things are better? And golf courses, I have not heard one word about any restrictions on new golf courses in this county. Or am I missing something?
So again, we are adapting to new conditions, right? And so the measures that I mentioned regarding our more intensive or restrictive conservation programs are the result of a planning effort that was conducted last year to respond to this changing condition that we have on the river and the situation, right? We have, as a community, though, been working on conservation for over 20 years, and we are held up as really a leader in the world. We give presentations, and people want to talk to us from Australia and Singapore and all over the world about the things that we're doing in our community to reduce consumptive use and to address conservation, right? So in terms of the pools, we're doing many things in conservation, and the idea, we got a lot of pushback from the pool industry, right? And so we thought that 600 square feet was a reasonable number. It's based on the average size of pools in the community. Pools are typically average, I think, around 460 square feet is the average size of a pool. But there are large pools that are up over 5,000 square feet, right? Luxury pools. And with that policy, we wanted to stop that type of pool construction. But there is more water that we can save in turf removal, in golf courses. So the Water District has put a moratorium on new golf courses, new community lakes, new water features, and the other municipalities are following that policy as well. I believe City of Henderson, right, is doing that, and
We put that in place as well.
right, and North Las Vegas will as well if they haven't already. So there will be no more golf courses built in this community. And the existing golf courses, many of them will have to become more efficient with the turf that they have. They'll likely, many of them will have to reduce the volume of turf that they're irrigating to get to that 4 acre-feet per irrigated acre. Some of them are at that number now, but many of them will have to make some adjustments for the amount of turf that they reduce. But I can tell you, we're looking at all consumptive uses. One of the major things that the Water District just put in place yesterday was a moratorium on evaporative cooling. So if you can imagine, hotels and casinos use cooling towers, and all of the package distribution facilities use swamp coolers. Those will no longer be allowed after 2026. And so they'll have to use mechanical cooling, air cooling, other technologies in order to cool their space. So there are many things that we're doing across this, the issues or the ways that water is being consumptively used to get this community to be more efficient.
When you talk about banking water, how do you withdraw your water when it comes due?
Right. So we have agreements with the state of Arizona, with the banking authority, and with Metropolitan Water District for the water that we've banked in those states. And those agreements are backed up by the Secretary of the Interior. And so in the case of Arizona, we would divert a greater amount. They would divert less out of Lake Havasu, out of their intakes at Lake Havasu, and we would divert more out of Lake Mead to recover that water. And they would meet their needs with groundwater development in Arizona in those basins where they've recharged water. In the Las Vegas Valley, we've done direct injection, and we would pull that water back out with our production wells that we currently have in the Las Vegas Valley. And California would work the same way as Arizona. They would turn to that banked resource that we have in there in California. They would reduce their diversion off the Colorado River, and we would increase our diversion out of Lake Mead.
If I could just add, Zane, you also have intentionally created surplus banked in Lake Mead as well. So surface water storage in Lake Mead. Collectively, Arizona, Nevada, and California have about 2.2 million acre feet of conserved banked water in Lake Mead, which can be delivered down to until we get to 1025. So that level 3 shortage condition, it can be called upon to take delivery of it to offset any of these shortage conditions, as I mentioned, as a result of level 1, level 2, down to, and it stops at a level 3. Then we have to no longer allow any banked water in Lake Mead to come out until we recover above 1025 again. So just to add a holistic picture, they can take that water as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Just a quick question. This doesn't directly affect us right now, but what about the desalinization plants? Are they working on that in Southern California to augment their water usage and maybe not use quite as much?
So can I take that from the federal perspective? So here, that is a great question, and augmentation is certainly a way to bring new water supplies. There's ocean water desalination, groundwater pumping, wastewater reclamation and reuse, which Zane mentioned. They're going to be investing in Pure Water Southern California, which is that wastewater treatment facility, and then Nevada would get some exchange water in exchange for funding some of that. But the issue right now with augmentation that I'll state, especially when you talk about coastal desalination off the coast of California, any projects that are funded by that state will only supplement their deliveries in that state. So California is entitled to 4.4 million acre feet of Colorado River water per year. If we're in a level 3 shortage, that number goes down to 4.135 million. So they get 350,000 acre foot reduction on level 3 shortage. So they're entitled to a certain amount of water per year, so call it 4.4 in a normal year, and then if they augment that system with coastal desalination of 100,000 acre foot of water, they still take 4.4 million off the Colorado, and then they get an extra 100,000 to augment their local supplies for their growing population or their economic development locally and things like that. So what we're looking at, and some of the things are ways, perhaps federally sponsored augmentation programs that we're certainly seeing more funding from Congress coming in into where we could actually help our states and our partners develop these different programs and then reduce their actual use from the Colorado River in exchange for the Fed helping to fund some of these. But that's certainly a long ways off because those projects are very intensive in terms of permitting, capital cost, and there's a lot of environmental impacts that could be perceived as well. So I think that's all I have to say on that.
Thanks, Mike. If I could add to that, for example, there's a desalination plant in Carlsbad, the Poseidon plant. It cost about $1 billion for that facility. It took 15 years to permit it and construct it, and it produces 55 million gallons of water per day. Our treatment plants, as a comparison for scale, our treatment plants will produce 900 million gallons per day. So desalination is a drop in a bucket, right? It's not a silver bullet. It's something that will be part of the future, likely part of the future solution. And in my projection, my resource projection graphs, that brown block I mentioned about new resources, desalination will likely be part of that. But that's out into the future because of the costs, the permitting issues, the litigation related to it, and also these kind of interstate resource issues that Mike's alluding to in terms of meeting local needs versus basin needs. The Bureau of Reclamation has done some work to look at the potential for building desalination in Mexico as well, because Mexico holds a portion of water, 1.5 million acre feet. Desal plant on the coast could meet some of their coastal needs for water, and we might be able to participate in that through a funding strategy that would allow us to access some of their Colorado River water, and they would meet their needs with desalination. So there's some of that international collaboration that is working on the Colorado River. Mexico is banking some of their water in Lake Mead. They're participating in some of the conservation programs, and could be part of the future solution related to desalination.
Okay, Sean.
It's probably a federal-related question. So earlier this year, the percentages of water allotted from the river to the states was reallocated, basically. And if I'm not mistaken, Nevada was in essence penalized. We had a larger percentage of our future allocation taken from us than California and Arizona did, even though we have been, better at conserving water. Why was a larger percentage of our allocation taken from those states when we've been doing the right thing for 20 years?
So that's a great question. So I think, let me just make sure I understood it correctly. So in terms of allocation, you mean the amount that you could take off the river? Because by the Boulder Canyon project, California annually is entitled to 4.4 million acre feet, Arizona to 2.8 million acre feet, Nevada 300,000, and that total makes up the lower basin apportionment of 7.5 million acre feet annually. So that's written in the law of the river. But what I believe you're saying is the allocation in terms of the shortage amounts. So when you go into a level 2 shortage condition, which we announced on August 16th of 2022, level 2 shortage condition, as Zane mentioned, Nevada drops from 300,000 acre feet to 275,000 acre feet, or really should have been 292,000, right, to 200 and something like that, plus DCP contribution. So anyway, sorry, not a Nevada resident, but not a Nevada water manager. But California specifically, and I'll put on my California hat, is the senior priority user on the Colorado River, right? So under the 2007 guidelines, which set the shortage triggers, and that was that negotiation when we saw the 2004 decline, went from almost full to below 50% of capacity in Lake Mead. California was not a party to the 2007 guidelines. under the level 3 shortage condition, California still took 4.4 million acre feet. Arizona took the steepest cuts. Nevada took cuts as well. And then under minute in 2012 and then follow up in 2017 with Mexico, they agreed to take cuts as well. And then in 2019, you may have heard of the drought contingency plans that were signed. Those were designed to be an overlay on top of the interim guidelines. And that's when California came to the table and said, we are going to contribute as well to protect the decline of the system. And below elevation 1045, they start contributing 200,000 acre feet. And below 1025, they will contribute up to 350,000 acre feet of conserved water. So I think that perhaps helps answer your question in terms of allocation percentage. It's California is the senior priority on the Colorado River. For the way it was based, their amount was based on first in time, first in line, and based on irrigated agriculture during the 1922 compact and the Boulder Canyon project in 1928. So that's why California received the biggest apportionment. Not many farms in Nevada, so unfortunately that's why we have the smallest here. But hopefully that helps answer your question.
Who would be responsible on kind of holding these other states' feet to the fire to make sure they are starting to implement more measures to conserve more water?
So that's a great question. So currently we have what's called the Lower Basin 500 Plus Plan, in which California is a party to that. So under that, what that means is, in addition to the Drought Contingency Plan and the 2007 interim guidelines, the Lower Basin states last year in December of 2021 came together when our projections, that red line that I showed you on that one graph, what we call the minimum probable, showed Lake Mead declining below an elevation of 1030 in the next 2 years. It triggered a provision under the Drought Contingency Plan which stated, essentially, we have to get together and discuss ways we can do more. So the states, California, Nevada, Arizona, the federal government came together to come up with this 500 plus plan, which means it's 500,000 acre feet of water per year for the next 2 years, 2022 and 2023. And what that's supposed to do is collectively, through compensated conservation activities, so paid fallowing programs, things like that, get farmers on board in California to reduce their use. So although California isn't forced under the law of the river to reduce their use, there's certainly the Palo Verde Irrigation District that's in a fallowing program with us and Metropolitan Water District that we fund, as well as other irrigation fallowing programs in California. So I think there's a discussion we're working with all of the water entitlement holders to try to figure out ways to squeeze every drop of water essentially that we can. And unfortunately, we're in a time right now that complicates matters even more deeply. Not only do we have unprecedented low water levels, but we also are seeing unprecedented inflation and prices for goods like fruits and vegetables. So at the time we need to fallow the most and pay farmers to fallow their fields, they are also seeing record crop prices, so they do not want to fallow fields for the price that we are consider reasonable or have considered maybe more than reasonable in previous years. So we're seeing some very far off prices on what they want to sell their water entitlements for to fallow their fields. And when I say sell, I should say essentially give it up for 1 year because they're on annual basis. And I think that just complicates these matters even further.
We had another question here.
Isn't there something to that phenomenon where you're pulling out turf and the lack of greenery that actually makes it hotter and drier?
So it's on. Okay. So we live in the Mojave Desert, right? And turf is not native to this environment. And the percentage of turf that exists in the valley relative to the impermeable hard surfaces is a small fraction. It's like 3% or less, right? And And so we've had this discussion about the impact of turf, reducing turf on the urban heat island impact, right? So urban heat island is something that is definitely a concern for Las Vegas. It's one of the fastest heating metropolitan areas in the United States. And so I would say that we should have turf where we're going to use it in that microclimate that makes sense, right? So in parks, in schoolyards where it makes sense. It does not make any sense to have turf along sidewalks, along streets, because that turf is not mitigating the heat that the street surface is generating, right? So overall, I believe that that reducing turf in this community, particularly in areas that are non-functional, that people are not playing on, the only person that is walking on that turf is the person that mows it or takes care of it, right? That turf needs to go away, and we need to think about how we develop our hardscapes, how we design our streets, how we provide shade, either hard structure shade or trees along those areas where we're walking and using the outdoor space. That's what I believe.
I have a real quick question that you can probably answer to something he said. Do you remember the Mesquite Women's Club and why they were formed?
Well, they were looking to have trees here, but I also remember that in 1908, Las Vegas Age had a bold headline in the newspaper that was in that size type that said Las Vegas has trees. Now what that means is we didn't before that. So as they're talking about dealing with turf and all these non-native plants and that sort of thing, all of that was important. That came in on the railroad. And all of the trees and that all came in on the railroad. That wasn't something that was here. There were mesquite trees here, but there weren't many of them.
So if I can clarify, I was referencing turf, and I believe trees are an important part of our community, and that we should have trees here to make this a livable space, and we can irrigate trees with the appropriate tree species in this community, and there is a need for us to make some adjustments to the tree species that we utilize here in our landscaped environment. But you can irrigate a tree with a dripper and have shade, in a larger space, and use significantly less water than you would with cool season turf. So I think there's a balance there, and and part of our use of turf in a community. And I grew up here. I remember I used to mow lawns as a kid, right? I remember most of the folks that live here in Las Vegas don't come from Las Vegas. They typically come from somewhere else that's much greener, where there's a lot of turf, and it's a thing that people wanted to bring with them and put in their environment. And the problem is that we can't afford that type of use, particularly when it's non-functional, when it's in areas that we're not playing on, our kids aren't using, right? That type of turf that's ornamental, it needs to go away. And we need to design our outdoor environment in a different way. That's what I believe.
I would like to add to that the fact that we had turf taken out and we were not allowed to put in rock. We actually had to put in plants. And they gave us a list of plants, so it's replaced by greenery.
That's right. So that is part of the Water Smart Landscaping Program requirements. So if you're going to get a rebate to remove turf, you have to replace that turf with at least 50% cover of shrubs and trees, right? And that is to try to address that heat island impact and make sure that that we're still providing a livable environment here in our community.
I know you said that you're using the Water Smart Landscaping Program and the 50% shrubbery and trees coverage to kind of combat the heat island effect. What are some other measures that you guys are considering long-term for mitigating that effect?
So we participate in the Southern Nevada Strong Sustainability Planning Program. It's a regional development plan for the community. And staff from the Regional Transportation Commission has recently, in the last year or so, has written a document. They put a plan together that identified areas in the community that are most vulnerable and likely to be impacted by urban heat island impact. That document is being used by the City of Las Vegas and other municipalities to plan tree planting activities, and the Water Authority is looking at participating in some of that. So trees are really the one way to deal with urban heat island. And like I mentioned, how we build our constructed environment, right? Our how we build buildings, how we build our walkways and our streets. There are engineering solutions that can help with that urban heat island impact. And so the community is very interested in this. So our county commissioners, our city council, there's a lot of discussion about how we can address urban heat island impact, become a more water efficient community, and continue to be a livable community, right? Which we all want, right? So we want to be a desirable, beautiful, livable community that has, and efficient as well. We want to be the most water efficient community that we can.
Okay, I'm being told that we need to stop, but do we have a question in the back? I'll let our recorder.
Yeah, so in the previous Henderson Speaks, our previous mayor, Deborah Mars, said something that really stuck with me. She said, if the city of Henderson doesn't keep growing, it can't sustain itself. So my question is, at what level of drought will that happen? When will we not be able to grow? When will we not be able to keep building?
So I think that the data, some of the graphics that I showed indicates that it's not about whether we can grow, it's about how we grow, right? So if we continue to grow in a very efficient way, if we minimize or eliminate consumptive water uses, we can continue to diversify as an economy and allow some growth to occur, right? We're limited by our land mass here in the Las Vegas Valley. We're surrounded by federal lands, so there is some limit there. And we ultimately, our water supply is limited, and my water resource projections showed that at some point in the future, we'll need to bring in additional supplies, right? Either through recycling, desalination, or exchanges on the Colorado River with other water users. So that is, will be a future need, but there are things that we can do in this community to extend that time frame and more efficiently use the water supply that we have today. And I just want to make the point that, Mike and Kyle are here. We represent different entities, but we're all on the same team. And there is significant collaboration has occurred for decades now to solve these problems and to ensure that this community and other communities in the Colorado River Basin have a reliable and safe water supply well into the future. There's a lot of really smart people. Besides, I work with some great and super intelligent people that are hardworking and dedicated to finding the best solutions to ensure that our community is in a good place when it comes to water. And the collaborations that we've had over the last several decades and that we continue in the future are super important to continuing that. And it's a community. It requires a community approach. And we're all on the same team. We're working towards good solutions. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank Zane, Kyle, and Mike for being here. I think this was a great talk. Thank you all. Want you to all mark your calendar for January 18th. Yes, January 18th. And we will hear the history of the Henderson School District and hopefully Railroad Pass as well. And we'll see you all back here in 2023.